The town of Pinebrook wasn't the kind of place that usually made headlines. With its tree-lined streets, two-lane highways, and the quiet hum of small-town life, most nights passed without incident. But on the night of October 14th, that illusion of peace shattered. It began with flashing red and blue lights, cutting through the darkness on a lonely county road. 23-year-old Marcus Hale, a college student heading home from his late-night shift at a gas station, found himself pulled over by two sheriff's deputies. The reason? A supposed broken taillight. At first, the stop seemed routine, but neighbors later reported hearing raised voices echoing through the night. One passerby saw Marcus standing outside his car, hands raised, pleading while officers closed in on him. Within minutes, Marcus was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a patrol car. The official charge: resisting arrest. By dawn, Marcus was dead. The next morning, the sheriff's office released a terse statement. At approximately 3:42 a.m., inmate Marcus Hale was discovered unresponsive in his cell. Efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. Preliminary findings indicate suicide by hanging. It should have ended there. Another tragic statistic. Another case closed. But Pinebrook wasn't buying it. Marcus had only been in custody for a few hours. Friends insisted he wasn't suicidal. He had been texting a classmate about an engineering project earlier that night. His mother remembered the last words he said before leaving for work. "See you in the morning, Ma." The details didn't add up. The sheriff's office claimed Marcus had torn a strip from his bedsheet and fashioned a noose. But when the coroner arrived, the sheet was intact. Jail cameras, which should have captured every moment, had malfunctioned conveniently that night. And then there were the bruises, deep, angry welts around Marcus's wrists and across his back. If Marcus had truly taken his own life, why did his body tell such a different story? Inside Pinebrook's only jail, silence reigned. Deputies gave conflicting accounts of Marcus's final hours. One said he was calm and cooperative. Another swore he was belligerent, banging on the bars. None of them could explain why the cameras weren't working or why a healthy young man with no history of mental illness would suddenly decide to end his life. The town began to whisper. In Pinebrook, whispers traveled faster than truth. For some, Marcus was just another casualty of a system that had failed too many times before. But for his family, this was no faceless tragedy. This was their son, their brother, the young man who fixed neighbors' lawnmowers, who stayed late after church to stack chairs, who once told his sister he wanted to build bridges that would outlast him. Now he was gone, and the only explanation came from the very people who had locked him away. The official file stamped the case closed, suicide, but the bruises told another story. The silence told another story. And Pinebrook was about to learn that some truths don't stay buried, no matter how hard those in power try to keep them hidden. Before his name became a headline, before his picture appeared on protest posters, Marcus Hale was simply Marcus, the boy who grew up on the south side of Pinebrook, where front porches leaned and the scent of home-cooked meals spilled out of every window on summer nights. Marcus was the eldest of three. His mother, Laverne Hale, worked double shifts as a nurse's aide at the county hospital. His father had left when Marcus was only 8, leaving Laverne to raise the children on her own. Money was always tight, but she raised them with faith, discipline, and an unshakable belief that education was their ticket out of poverty. And Marcus listened. By high school, he was known as the quiet fixer. If a classmate's bike chain snapped, Marcus had the tools and the patience to mend it. If a teacher's projector jammed, Marcus was there after class, tinkering until it worked again. His teachers said he had the hands of an engineer and the heart of a leader. He became the first in his family to graduate high school with honors. And when he received his acceptance letter to the state university's engineering program, Laverne cried for hours. At his graduation ceremony, she pressed his tassel down over his forehead, whispering, "You're going to build something bigger than this town." At college, Marcus worked nights at a gas station to pay for his books. He wasn't the type to complain. He juggled classes, work, and family obligations with the steady determination of someone who knew how fragile opportunity was and how hard his mother had fought to give him one. But Marcus wasn't all work and no joy. He loved music, especially old soul records. He'd spend evenings with his headphones on, humming along to Sam Cooke or Otis Redding. He was also fiercely protective of his younger sister, Alana. When she struggled with math, Marcus sat with her for hours, drawing diagrams on scrap paper until she understood. For all his quiet nature, Marcus carried a big dream. He wanted to design bridges, structures that connected people, places, and lives. Bridges don't discriminate, he once told a classmate. They don't care where you're from. They just bring you across. But while Marcus dreamed of bridges, Pinebrook built walls. The town itself carried a history few spoke about openly. Pinebrook was divided, literally and socially. The South Side, where Marcus grew up, was home to most of the black community, crowded into older neighborhoods with aging schools and underfunded resources. The North Side, by contrast, sprawled with new developments, manicured lawns, and predominantly white families. Though unspoken, the divide ran deep. Black drivers were pulled over more frequently. Businesses on the South Side struggled with stricter inspections, and complaints against police rarely went anywhere. Marcus himself had been stopped twice before the night of his arrest. Once walking home from campus, once driving to a friend's house. Both times, he had been released with no charges. But both times, he had come home shaken. To his family, Marcus was their pride, the proof that hard work and hope could open doors. To his professors, he was a promising student destined for more. But to the officers who pulled him over that October night, he was something else entirely, a young black man behind the wheel after dark. The tragedy of Marcus's death wasn't just in how he died. It was in who he was before. He wasn't a statistic. He wasn't a stereotype. He was a son who kissed his mother's cheek before every shift. A brother who kept his sister's school photo taped inside his notebook. A student who dreamed of leaving a legacy of steel and concrete that would outlast him. And that's why his death hit Pinebrook so hard. Because Marcus wasn't faceless. Everyone in town knew someone like him. A neighbor's son, a cousin, a classmate. His story forced the community to confront an uncomfortable truth. If someone like Marcus could end up lifeless in a jail cell, then no one was truly safe from the shadows of Pinebrook's broken system. When the news of Marcus Hale's sudden death inside the Pinebrook police holding cell broke, the official statement was brief. Detainee found unresponsive. Suspected suicide. Investigation ongoing. For many in Pinebrook, the words didn't sit right. Marcus was only 21. He had no history of depression, no signs of despair. In fact, the night before his arrest, he had called his sister Alana, reminding her about her math test and promising to check on her later in the week. His last words to her were light, hopeful. "You've got this, kiddo. Don't let that test scare you." Yet within hours, the police claimed he had hanged himself with his own shoelaces in the holding cell. The first cracks appeared almost immediately. At the jail, there were no functioning cameras covering Marcus's cell. The official reason? The surveillance system was under maintenance. The intake log was incomplete, missing the names of the officers who processed him. And when his body was released to his mother, she noticed bruises on his arms and a split on his lower lip. Injuries never mentioned in the report. Laverne Hale, grief-stricken but resolute, demanded answers. She filed complaints with the department, pressed for details, and begged the local DA for transparency. Each time, she was met with stone-faced replies. "We are conducting a thorough internal review." But the review never seemed to move forward. When independent journalists began digging, more troubling facts surfaced. Marcus's arrest had been for resisting a stop. Officers claimed he refused to provide identification, though multiple witnesses who had seen him pulled over on Main Street said Marcus had calmly complied. One woman who had been walking her dog nearby described hearing raised voices, then a sharp cry of pain before Marcus was shoved into the squad car. The department ignored these witness accounts. Instead, they doubled down on their narrative. Marcus had been combative and uncooperative. For Pinebrook's black community, this was a familiar script. Time and again, allegations of misconduct faded into silence. Complaints vanished. Cases stalled. To many, Marcus's death wasn't an isolated incident, but the latest chapter in a long, ugly history of abuse and cover-up. As protests began forming outside the courthouse, the town grew tense. The Pinebrook police chief, Robert Harlan, held a press conference, his uniform crisp, his voice steady. "We ask the public to remain calm while we conclude our investigation. We take the loss of any life seriously. But at this time, there is no evidence to suggest foul play." Those words ignited more outrage than they quelled. Because to Marcus's family and friends, the evidence was everywhere. The bruises, the missing footage, the fabricated narrative. If this wasn't foul play, what was? Civil rights organizations soon joined the fight, sending lawyers to Pinebrook to represent the Hale family. They filed motions to obtain police records, body cam footage, and communication logs from the night of Marcus's arrest. But obstacles emerged at every turn. Files were lost. Requests were delayed. Body cams, it was claimed, had conveniently run out of charge during the arrest. Still, pieces of the truth leaked out. A whistleblower, an anonymous clerk inside the department, revealed that officers had been instructed not to speak about the incident. Another tip suggested that Marcus had been left alone in the holding cell for over 4 hours, violating department policy. The more the family pressed, the more resistance they met. But something else was happening too. People were beginning to rally. Marcus's story spread across social media. His smiling graduation photo shared thousands of times with the hashtag Justice for Marcus. Local churches organized candlelight vigils. College students marched, carrying signs that read, "Bridges don't discriminate. Neither should justice." Still, the official stance never budged. Suicide. Case closed. But Marcus's mother refused to let the system bury her son's truth. She hired a private pathologist to conduct an independent autopsy. Weeks later, the results rocked Pinebrook. The bruises on Marcus's arms were consistent with restraint. His neck injuries didn't align with suicide by shoelace, but rather pointed toward external force. The report concluded with chilling words. Cause of death highly suspicious. Homicide cannot be ruled out. With those findings, pressure mounted. National outlets picked up the story. Civil rights leaders descended on Pinebrook, demanding a federal investigation. Protesters filled the courthouse steps daily, chanting Marcus's name. The town was no longer divided into quiet north and south. Pinebrook had become a battleground, where truth and denial collided. And in the heart of it all, Marcus's family clung to one certainty. The system might have tried to silence him, but his voice was louder than ever. Because the investigation was no longer just about Marcus Hale. It was about every young black man in Pinebrook who had been stopped, searched, silenced, or scarred. His case was the mirror reflecting a town's deepest wounds, and the fight for answers was only just beginning. By the time the case reached the courtroom, Pinebrook was no longer just a quiet town in America's heartland. It had become a national symbol of justice denied and demanded. The Justice Department, pressured by mounting public outrage and the independent autopsy, opened a federal civil rights investigation. At last, there would be a trial. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Journalists from across the country squeezed into the benches, their cameras waiting outside like vultures circling the courthouse steps. Protesters held signs across the street, chanting Marcus's name. His family sat in the front row, Laverne clutching a photograph of her son in his graduation cap. She refused to let the system reduce him to a case number or a statistic. On the defense side sat 3 police officers, Officer Daniel Briggs, Officer Mark Dillon, and Sergeant Carter Hayes. They were the men who had arrested Marcus the night he died. Their faces were stern, guarded. Each had pleaded not guilty to charges of misconduct, obstruction, and civil rights violations. The prosecution's opening statement was simple yet piercing. This case is about truth. A young man lost his life in police custody, and those sworn to protect him chose to protect themselves instead. The defense countered by clinging to the department's long-standing claim. Marcus had been combative, they said. He had tragically taken his own life. They warned the jury not to be swayed by emotions or media sensationalism. But as witnesses began to testify, cracks widened in their story. A medical expert from the independent autopsy stood firm. The bruises on Marcus's body were not consistent with suicide. The injuries around his neck suggested pressure applied by another person, not self-inflicted strangulation. Then came the testimony of Sarah McIntyre, the woman who had witnessed Marcus's arrest while walking her dog. She described seeing Marcus cooperate, handing over his license before being shoved against the hood of the squad car. She remembered hearing him cry out in pain. Her voice quivered as she spoke. He wasn't fighting them. He was begging them to stop. The defense tried to discredit her, pointing out inconsistencies in the exact time she claimed to be there. But her story aligned with other fragments of evidence. A neighbor's cell phone recording, partially obscured but capturing Marcus's voice shouting, "I didn't do anything." The jury listened intently. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from within the department itself. Officer James Caldwell, a younger cop who had joined Pinebrook PD only months before Marcus's death, broke the blue wall of silence. Shifting uncomfortably in the witness chair, he admitted that supervisors had instructed him not to speak of the incident. "We were told to stick to the story, that Marcus was combative and that the cameras weren't working. But that wasn't the whole truth." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense immediately attacked Caldwell's credibility, painting him as a disgruntled rookie with a grudge against his superiors. But his testimony planted seeds of doubt the defense couldn't easily uproot. For weeks, the trial unfolded like a chess match between truth and denial. Expert witnesses, leaked memos, and inconsistencies in the officers' own testimonies stacked against the defense. Yet even as the evidence mounted, the outcome was far from certain. History had shown time and again how these cases often ended, with acquittals, mistrials, or settlements that silenced families without ever delivering justice. As closing arguments approached, tension reached a breaking point. The prosecution reminded the jury of the missing surveillance footage, the fabricated intake logs, and the bruises that told a story no police report ever could. Marcus Hale did not kill himself, the prosecutor said, voice rising with conviction. Marcus Hale was killed by a system that thought his life was disposable. The defense, in turn, pleaded for reason over passion. Don't let protests outside this courthouse decide this case. Don't let pressure from the media or politics cloud your judgment. Marcus Hale's death was a tragedy, but it was not a crime. Finally, the jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed, then a day, then two. Outside the courthouse, protesters held vigil. Some prayed, others sang. Laverne sat on the steps each evening, clutching her son's photo, whispering words only she could hear. When the jury returned, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The foreperson stood, unfolding the verdict slips. "We, the jury, find the defendants." The courtroom braced for the words that would either shatter or restore faith in justice. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of the jury foreperson's voice. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty of obstruction of justice and misconduct. On the charge of civil rights violations resulting in death, we find the defendants guilty." The words landed like thunder. Gasps erupted. Some cried out in disbelief, others in relief. Laverne pressed Marcus's photo to her chest and sobbed, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since that terrible night, she felt the weight of truth acknowledged, not just by her, but by the system that had once denied it. The officers sat stone-faced, their once proud uniforms now stripped of authority, their futures reduced to prison terms. Even then, their defense attorneys vowed to appeal, insisting politics had swayed the jury. But the verdict stood. Outside, the crowd roared. Chants of justice for Marcus filled the air. Strangers hugged one another, united not only in grief, but in a rare, fragile sense of victory. National headlines flashed. Officers convicted in Pinebrook death. For once, a small town's tragedy had broken through the noise of indifference. But victories in cases like this were never clean. Within Pinebrook, divisions deepened. Some residents rallied behind the officers, painting them as scapegoats sacrificed to appease public anger. Local businesses displayed signs reading "Support our police," while others put up murals of Marcus, calling him a martyr for justice. Families argued across dinner tables. Churches split into factions. Pinebrook's image as a quiet, harmonious town was shattered. For Laverne, the verdict was not a triumph, but a bittersweet validation. "They took my son," she told reporters. "No sentence will give him back to me. But at least the world knows he didn't do this to himself." In the months that followed, Marcus's story sparked reforms. The state legislature passed a bill mandating independent investigations for all in-custody deaths. Pinebrook's police department was placed under federal oversight, with body cameras and civilian review boards introduced for the first time. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Nationally, Marcus's name became part of a larger conversation about accountability. His portrait joined posters at rallies alongside other victims of injustice. Activists chanted his name in marches from Chicago to Los Angeles. His story was cited in congressional hearings, where lawmakers debated long overdue reforms in policing. Still, change was slow, and the shadows of cynicism lingered. For every Marcus Hale, there were countless others whose names never made the news, whose families never saw a courtroom. Many asked, was this truly justice, or just an exception carved out under pressure? For the Hale family, healing came in small, quiet ways. Laverne started a foundation in Marcus's name, offering scholarships to young men and women of color who dreamed of college but lacked resources. She spoke at high schools and community centers, urging kids never to let the world define them by stereotypes. At one event, a teenager asked her, "Do you forgive them? The ones who did this?" Laverne paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't forgive what they did, but I refuse to carry hate in my heart. Hate already took my son. I won't let it take me, too." That was her act of defiance, refusing to let the system break her spirit as it had broken Marcus's body. Years later, Pinebrook remained a scarred town. The courthouse where the trial was held became both a reminder of injustice and a symbol of accountability. The debate never truly ended. Some called Marcus a hero. Others still whispered that the officers were betrayed by their own system. But no one could erase what had been revealed. The cracks in the shield of power that once seemed untouchable. The shadows of Pinebrook would never vanish. They stretched long across the country, reminding people of the cost of silence, the danger of unchecked authority, and the power of truth when ordinary citizens refused to look away. And though Marcus Hale was gone, his name lived on, not as a statistic in a dusty report, but as a voice that still echoed in protests, courtrooms, and whispered prayers. A voice that demanded the world remember.